Hello, I am officially live. Jessica here. Thank y'all for tuning in to the week 4 discussion of The Color of Compromise. I'm here alone tonight, so I'm going to just get straight to the point so that we can end at a reasonable time. It's already kind of late. So, all the housekeeping stuff as usual. Please share this video with anyone who you think would benefit from watching it. If you are watching from the Facebook group, since the group is private, you would not be able to share it out of the group. But if you're on YouTube, on either of the channels, either my personal channel or the book club channel, you will be able to share it. So please share it. Make sure you're also following all of the social media accounts. I have not updated them a lot in the last 2 weeks just because I've really been reading and doing a lot of like sidebar research on some of the things that are discussed in these chapters. But do still follow social media. We're Unlearning Movement on Instagram and the Unlearning Anti-Blackness book club on YouTube. You can also go through my personal accounts. If you're watching this video, you're obviously on one of them. So you can just look in the description box somewhere and find all the links. Also, our Facebook group is kind of dry. We have some members there, but there is not a lot of discussion going on. And I really want to kind of boost it. So please participate in the group. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to share your thoughts about the book or any of the topics that we cover. Don't be afraid to talk and get to know one another and find out why we're all on this journey. But just socialize. I think the group will add value to the book for you because I know I feel a lot more intellectual when I'm able to have these discussions with people who are reading the book, like some of y'all. So I know other people like the way that feels. It's encouraging. It makes you want to keep going. So please, what's the word? Interact in the group, engage in the group. And lastly, last for housekeeping, if you want to support this book club and more content like this meaning panel discussions, going into topics that require research, things like that, please consider becoming a patron. Or you can make a one-time contribution via Cash App. Again, all the links are everywhere, especially on YouTube. You can find everything. So I want to just get into a little bit about how we're going to actually do the discussion tonight so that I can be on time. Hold on just a second. Okay, I'm back. So the way I'm going to do the discussion tonight, we're going to talk about chapters 7 through 9 and make connections to things that we see now, things that we've seen, or things that we have experienced in the church and in our Black skin. Talking they can run in. I'm also going to ask questions along the way. So if you are active in the chat, that will make it a lot easier. It'll make the discussion more valuable. So it's not just my opinion. We can hear yours or see yours too. And if you want, if there's anybody watching that wants to join in on the discussion, I'll give you an opportunity at the end, toward the end. Just be brief, to the point as possible. I'm trying to really work on making this a meaningful conversation, but not just carrying it on. So I just want to I'm trying to be more brief. And if you're going to call in, don't be afraid to show your face. I would prefer that if you decide to call in that you show your face, or at the least have a photo on your profile. Because I just don't want to have a black screen showing. So next week will actually be our last week discussing this book. We will be finishing up next week. And I encourage you, once we're done, to go back. He covered a lot of things and put a lot of stuff out there that he really didn't go into a lot of detail about. So there are a lot of things that are worth researching, doing your own independent research. So I encourage you, once we're done next week, since that'll be the last time, excuse me, I come on or we come on and actually talk about the contents of the book at length. Yeah, go research, because the more that you know, the more that you learn, the more you're going to grow. And when we grow, we can't hide it. You know, it's something that just comes out of us. It just oozes out of us. So as we're growing, we're helping other people to grow, because our conversations are going to change, our interests are going to change, they're going to widen, and it just opens up our world. So do the research and have expectations of growth. Growth is always good; it's never wasted ever. We will not have another group reading selection until August. So my plan is that we read a book together every other month. So since it's June, we'll skip July and read something together in August. So if you want to suggest a book, please do so. You can do so in the Facebook group, or you can email me if you have my email information, and I'll announce the new book sometime in July. And I'm also going to send out a survey about just your experience, so that it can help me improve the book club and just improve everything that we're doing now, and also build. So please complete it once you get it. It'll be after the book is done, though. And just a couple more things before we get into the discussion. I want to eventually have small in-person events related to these topics, and they'll all pretty much be panel style events. So if you are open to participating, say you want to be a panelist, maybe you want to suggest some topics or whatever, please reach out to me and let me know. I'm going to try to do one next month, and it'll likely be virtual. More than likely, it'll be virtual. But that's why I offer Patreon to you as a membership, and just different ways that you can financially support, because that'll help me to do more of those. And lastly, as we think about the next book and where we go from here, it made me kind of think about it like, okay, Jessica, you have an anti-Blackness book club. That's great. But, you know, what are y'all doing with the information? Once you learn this, what are you doing? You know, till the group gets larger, what are you going to do? So it really made me think about the what's next. So I do want to steer the conversation back to anti-Blackness, because the book club is about getting to the root of it, learning how it shows up, and then circling back for solutions. But I don't want to just leave the solutions here. So as we finish the book, we'll do a call to action based on the book, and I'll put together a toolkit to help you with it. So if our call to action is have regular conversations with Christians about what we learned in the book and what they think we can do to go forward, learn their attitudes or whatever. And so the toolkit will have like conversation starters and things like that. So I think that's something that'll be relatively easy to do, but also continue to push us forward. So let me know what y'all think about that. You can leave me your feedback in the comments. And I think we're ready to get into the discussion. I do want to cover two very important things from chapter 6 that we did not talk about in the last discussion. And the first one is convict leasing. So what convict leasing was, I had heard of this, but I never went and looked into it, because I knew at the end of the day it led to the current prison system. But for the book, I did get to, learn a little bit more about it. And so basically what the convict leasing system was, it was a system in which Southern states leased their prisoners to private companies, railways, mines, large plantations. So these prisoners could be leased to a plantation, basically making them a slave again. Now, states profited, but the prisoners did not earn any pay. They faced dangerous conditions, deadly work conditions, inhumane work conditions, much like slavery. And it became known as slavery by another name. and it's carried on all the way up until the 1930s. And so I kind of want to bring us to it like present day, how we can make sense of what we see now, see happening now. And basically, once slavery was abolished, new laws came about. New laws were established throughout the country that only applied to Black people. So these were called the Black Codes. And this is where people say, you know, this was the first time they really saw another form of slavery. And this is where the systemic oppression begins, you know, even though it starts with slavery, but this is where we see it from a legal standpoint. And so again, they only apply to Black people, and it made Black people at risk for being prosecuted as criminals for things such as loitering, breaking their curfew, having a weapon, not being able to prove that they were employed. Those things would land them in prison. So the point was to stop Black advancement. And this is the concept of white rage that Dr. Carol Anderson talks about in her book. Every time Black people made a gain, white people, the law came and like kicked them back. And so this was an example of it. And this in the first time changed the landscape of the prison system, because prisoners were mainly white at this time. And for the first time in history, many of the state prisons held more Black prisoners. So it actually changed the face of it. And I wanted to bring it back to today's time and talk about what the prison population looks like now. And so this is the graph from the Pew Research Center about the Black imprisonment rate. And as you can see here, Black people make up 12% of the U.S. adult population, but Black people make up 33% of the U.S. prison population. And just to compare it, Black people make up the smallest number of U.S. population, adult population. Hispanics have surpassed Blacks, and you know, that's a whole different thing. But even Hispanics have a lower prison population rate than Black people. So even though these are, when they say Hispanic, you're talking about a lot of these people are immigrants. A lot of them have not been in America as long as Black people. So it's just kind of putting into scope that as more people are coming into the country, Black people are still being discriminated against. You see that we're still at the bottom no matter what. And so another thing that I wanted to note is that this is not just while the data from race includes women, Black men are the population that are most likely to be in prison. And so this contributes to a lot of issues that you see in the Black community, or that people talk about. I mean, and it ranges from family issues to financial, wealth related issues, education related issues. I mean, it just is a trickle down effect. So when people say that Black people have an equal opportunity or an equal opportunity, that's not true, because as we can see, as early as the 1930s, Black people were still being plotted against. How do you come out of that when everything is literally against you? So that's just something to think about, and I wanted to share those statistics with you, or their information, and that's something that you should really kind of look into, because there are other things that are born out of this, such as the school to prison pipeline, and then we get into just how Black people are still sentenced differently than the number of innocent people, and the similarities to lynching, which we'll get into. It's just a lot. It's a lot going on with the prisons. Now, I went back and forth with my sister about whether to include visuals for this part of the discussion, but I have to. I can't not, because I understand that there are some people who may be watching this discussion or reading this book for the first time, and this is the first time that you will see any of this. So I want to, just kind of preface this part of the discussion with that. So another thing that I wanted to touch on from chapter 6 that we didn't get into was lynching. There was a section on lynching, and I know that was difficult to read for many of us. I know it was for me. Tony told me how difficult it was. Bree told me it was difficult. But we have to talk about lynching a little bit more into context than what was covered in the book. And why is because if this all is under the lens of Christian, compromising, Christians compromising with slavery, we have to have an accurate picture of what they were actually compromising with. And it takes us back to that question that we had last week, in what is a better word for compromising, because that just doesn't capture what it really was and what it really meant for there to be Christians during this time period. So I do want to explore lynching more, and I think that I'll do that in the Facebook group and through other videos. But all in all, I was really frustrated with how Jemar Tisby dealt with lynching. I think that he used the examples about the couple that was lynched, and then the pregnant woman that was lynched, and how they killed her baby. I think that was a good shock, like a shock strategy for the book. But there's so much more that can be said, or that needs to be said, about lynching. So I'm going to show y'all some photos. I'm going to show you a couple of photos, and they are of lynching. So if you want to look down, this would be a good time for you to look down. But and that's kind of it. I haven't shown them yet, but that goes into censorship in the media, and we're talking about how all of this stuff is talked about from a historical context. That if you talk about these things, your video will get reported, and because you talked about lynching, or you showed a photo of a lynching, when this is literally the truth. So all things can have pros, and then they can have some real serious cons, and that's what critical race theory that falls into that space too. But like I said, I'm about to show pictures from a lynching, so I can really put it into context, like what's going on here. So I'm gonna share my screen now. Lynchings were not I'm gonna read a quote from the book on lynching, and it is on page 109. And I was very frustrated. I wrote a message with expletives and exclamation points in my book. I wrote a note. But at the bottom of page 109, it reads, while some Christians spoke out and denounced these lynchings, just as some Christians called for abolition, basically saying, yeah, slavery was going on, but there were Christians who, there was slavery going on, but it was Christians who were fighting for abolition. And so basically he's saying here, yeah, lynchings were going on, but there were Christians who denounced them. The majority, like he continues to say, the majority stance of the American church was avoidance, turning a blind eye to the practice. Now, you see these photos here. How could you, as a Christian, turn a blind eye to this? And here is why. And I think that he goes on to say, it's not that members of every white church participated in lynching, but the practice could not have endured without the relative silence, if not outright support, of the church, the Christian church. So how does a church, how does the body of Christ see this and not deal with it and not avoid it? And it was because what he did not say, a lot of the people who were conducting, for lack of a better word, who were overseeing, who were organizing, orchestrating these lynchings, were people in the church. There were pastors who were members of the Klan, deacons who were members of the Klan. And he also doesn't fully capture what lynchings were to the people during this time. And so we have one from 1913, one from 1908, one from 1916. These were social events. These were like sporting events for them. What we would experience at a sporting event, that was what lynching was for them. And I did some extensive research on this, and I found dozens of scholarly articles about this, because I wanted to share more of the context. I'm trying to find one of my screenshots from it so that I can read it without like having to go into my drive and all of that. Trying to see where it is. I'll put it in a Facebook group. So I'll put the quote that I found in the academic articles in the Facebook group, and then I'll put the PDFs to those articles on Patreon. So if you want access to that and to support the book club, please do join Patreon. You can join for as little as $3 a month. But anyways, these were like sporting events for them. Children attended these events. Like I said, the pastors, the community, there were crowds, like the crowd, but the third one kind of does, and how they're posing with them. And the third image, they actually burned the body of this person that was lynched. They burned their body, and they had I'm sorry, I saw a comment. They burned his body, and so what they used to say was these were barbecues. And it's so ironic that now you have black people saying that this white person can come to the barbecue. Like, y'all was the barbecue back in the day, like Negroes was. So the one that you see with the burning body, that actually went on a postcard. So the photographers, this was a whole industry. You know what? I am just gonna pull up the article, because I really I just got to get a whole context of this. Okay, I don't know how well y'all can see that. Oh, can y'all see that? Okay, so it says throughout the South, lynchings were public theater attended by almost everyone in town. On occasion, students were let out of school and businesses were closed, so all could attend the lynching. The spectacle often lasted for hours. In these lynching bees, or Negro barbecues, as these carnivals were called, the victims were often tortured before they were hung. After their deaths, it was not unusual for the bodies to be burned and mutilated. Participants cut off fingers. Let me zoom in on it because this is what Christians were compromising with. After their deaths, it was not unusual for the bodies to be burned and mutilated. Participants cut off fingers, toes, and genitals to take home for souvenirs. The governor of South Carolina once received the finger of a lynched black man in the mail, which he promptly planted in the garden of the governor's mansion. Are y'all reading this? So I was frustrated. Let me continue. Okay, many of the photographs of the lynchings have survived to this day because they were made into postcards to be used as collectibles or to send home to friends and relatives. In fact, some of these cases In fact, in some cases, enterprising printers brought portable printing presses to the lynching site so they could produce instant postcards to sell to people who witnessed or participated in the lynching. So the photograph again that you see on the left, I'm going back to it. I'm sorry, I'm the presenter and the producer on this, so it takes me a minute sometimes. But for this third photo here, this one right here, where you see my mouse at, this is what was said regarding that photo. That photo was actually a postcard. It says, on the other side of this photo, it says, "This is the barbecue we had last night. My picture is to the left, your son, Joe." So Joe sent that picture to his daddy saying, "This is the barbecue that we had." So Black people were the barbecue. So y'all stop telling white they can come to the barbecue. Stop saying that, because you was the barbecue. It ain't even cute no more or funny. But I just feel like he could have put what lynchings were more into context, because that, even though he did the shock value part, it's still like we need to understand that these Christians were in the audience. They weren't at home like, "Ooh, I hate it." They were in the audience. It was a big deal. And I would say that, and y'all let me know what you think about this, but in the book, he reiterates over and over that racism adapts. It doesn't go away, it adapts. And so I think that one of the ways that lynchings have adapted over the years have been through police killings. And that when we see video of these police killings, or when we hear audio, from the officer cameras and things like that, when people are witnessing, that is like a modern day lynching, because you can't do anything about it. You're not going to jump in and save them. And that's how Black people felt during those times. And there's not a lot of research on the families of lynching victims and how it impacted them. There's just so much that can be talked about on this topic. And I really wish he would have taken it a step further, because again, his audience is a white evangelical audience. He wrote it for them. So it frustrates me when he doesn't go all the way. And I know he's trying to like stay on board, but we do need to know some details so we can fully understand the times and what people were compromising with. So to go into chapter 7, so the main takeaway for me from chapter 7, which begins on page 111, was that racism was not limited to the South, which this is something that I knew, but a lot of people seem to think that, especially Northerners, they seem to think that coming to the South is like, oh, it's racist people. Racism is everywhere. So nowhere was safe. Can you imagine being Black in America and nowhere is safe? Nowhere is safe for you. So that was the main takeaway for me. And just a couple other things from chapter 7 that I think are worth noting and worth, talking about a little bit is on page 13, where it talks about immigrants and how immigrants adapted to America's system of segregation, and many of them identified with whiteness. So that's when you think about how some white people will say, "Oh, I'm Irish," or "I'm Italian," but they identify as white. You don't see that on the papers where you check what you are. So they just slide on into the white category. And this is why I say, if you're an immigrant and you came to America, whether you're Black or not, because we do have Black immigrants, you've come on the back of Black America. Because when you come here, you're still not us. And this is why the ADOS movement exists, which is the American Descendants of Slaves. That's why Black people are trying to protect our heritage and our lineage, because we're even getting kind of, I don't know the right word, but that's even impacting what we're trying to do politically, because so many people are actually immigrants, and the descendants of slaves, they haven't gotten their reparations. They haven't gotten anything for what the ancestors, those before them, had to endure. So immigration is really a big issue, and the politicians that we have now, they're not touching it because they scared. They too scared to say what we all know is true. And also, it shows that what I have been saying and why I believe that white supremacy is an evil spirit, because this is a global thing. Although they were not American, they slid in and identified as white, because who wants to really be black? Nobody wants to really be black. And it contributes to anti-blackness, because if you're coming in and you're, as an immigrant, you're an outsider, you identify with the dominant society, that means you're never going to advocate in my interest, which is why we see the Asian American movement that happened this year. None of them were standing out talking about Black Lives Matter, but they co-opted the language from their movement. So that's a whole different conversation, but I thought it was noteworthy. You know, I thought it was something that to talk about. And I actually have an experience with this in the church. I'll never forget, an Asian woman was talking to me about George Floyd. And, you know, I reminded her, like, you know, you're a minority, but you're different from me. You don't have to worry about, you know, your husband getting pulled over and maybe dying and never coming home because you're not white. And she told me that she didn't even think about the fact that she's a minority. And that tells you, like, because you identify with whiteness. So this is a problem. You know, this is a problem. And, you know, just add it to the list. But I think it also says something about, our struggle and how we're really alone. Like, we don't have any friends. We don't have any friends in this. Bree, someone saying hi. I don't know. I started saying only one person is watching, so she might be gone. So another thing I wanted to say, and I mean this respectfully, but I wanted to talk about the Black soldiers and the racism that they face. And I think that it's very illogical for a Black person to serve and protect America. And again, like, I know people go into it for different reasons and they just want to, you know, defend the home front and all of that, but it just doesn't seem logical to fight and risk your life for a country that doesn't respect your rights. And we see that this is something that dates all the way back. It goes all the way back. And I think that demonstrates, even now, how we kind of approach our liberation backwards. Like, you're fighting for the country before you even establish your own rights in this country. That's a backwards approach. And we see that over and over and over. And I think the movement that really worked in a more, proactive to an extent, was the Black Power movement. So they were proactive in pursuing Black liberation. They weren't working backwards. And that's something that I really admired about their approach. And lastly, like, it talks about, from chapter 7, it talks about redlining and white flight. And this is what has happened in Jackson, where I live. We have a lot, like, Jackson was not always a predominantly Black city. It had lots of white residents, but this city experienced white flight. And so these are just some examples of some headlines in case you've never seen redlining and all of that. But these are some headlines going all the way back to February of this year, just showing how this is still an issue. Like, the things that we're talking about, and now we're moving more into the 60s and the 70s, these things are still issues. They have not gone away. So when we talk about progress, when we talk about, oh, you know, we have seen progress. Where? We we haven't seen any real progress. We've seen social progress and Black people being allowed, welcomed, led into certain circles, but we haven't seen real progress for the majority of the community ever. And it's kind of scary to even think about, because it makes you wonder, like, well, is it ever even going to happen? Especially because we still see the compromising that he talks about from a historical standpoint. We still see it now. And so moving on to chapter 8, the main takeaway for me from chapter 8 was the parallel stories of Dr. King and Billy Graham, and how it kind of illustrates this different world that Black and white Christians live in. And so me and Tony were talking about this earlier, and he was saying, you know, we sound crazy talking about Black and white and how it's so much bigger than that. And it is, but I feel like for this issue, it's interesting that we're still so far on different extremes. Like, we're on total opposite ends of the spectrum even still. And I want to note that Tisby didn't really go there on this either, but Dr. King's rhetoric changed a lot before his assassination, and it kind of led to it. He talked about how he had regrets about integration. He had regrets about his approach. And I'm wondering if it was because he was trying to stay within the confines of the Christian faith and be a good or true Christian, and he realized that that wasn't who he was dealing with. And then you have Billy Graham, who's in the midst of all of this and not really doing anything at all. He was very performative in his actions. And it's so funny because a white woman that I went to church with sent me a Billy Graham Bible study one time to do with her. And I just remember thinking, like, this man racist. But yeah, so Dr. King had some regrets about his approach, and I wish he were here to kind of go into detail or, share more of his feelings about those regrets. And he also, not only was he talking about like regrets from integration, but he began to really understand the economics of it all. And he called for reparations. He said that we were coming to Washington to get our check. And that's when they realized that they had to take him out. So it's important to note, like Jamar did, he did note that King was not popular. So white Christians especially love to share the Martin Luther King quotes and things like that. But had we been during his time, y'all wouldn't have liked him. Based on your politics now, you would not have liked him. So I encourage you to watch the MLK FBI documentary. Tony bought it for me on Prime a couple months ago when it came out. But I'm surprised more people have not been talking about it, because it's such an interesting documentary, and it goes into his rhetoric change, and we learned some things about him. It was amazing. It was really good, and I want to do a review on it, but I need to watch it again. But if you're looking for something good to watch and do a little research at the same time, watch the MLK FBI documentary. The papers were released, some of the papers that the FBI had on him. So they released the papers, and this was about some of the findings, but there is more that's going to be released. I think it's ironic with the timing of the release, and me and Tony talked about that too. And why I feel like the country, and this is kind of what motivates me now to do this book club and go through these books, because I feel like the country's at a pivotal point that we're still in a workable phase of this race thing. But each side is amping up, and then when we talk about the releasing of these documents, when the judge or someone ordered them to be released, I'm assuming it was a judge. I can't remember all the details, but I think that timing is going to be very interesting of when it comes out with where we are as a society based on where we're going at this point. But some other things to note from chapter 8 is that Rosa Parks was not the first Black person to refuse to give her seat up on the bus. The first person to do that was Claudette Colvin, and she was a 15-year-old Black girl, and they did not choose her to be the face of the movement. I think you're asking about the documentary. It's called MLK FBI. It's really, really good. But it's some things that you're not gonna want to believe in it, but it's really good. So this is Claudette Colvin. She was actually the first to refuse to give up her seat on the bus. And I hate to say it, but I have to say it because it's true. The reason why Claudette was not chosen as the leader of the movement and Rosa Parks was because of uplift suasion. So this is something that I will always remind you of, and it comes from the very first book from the book club, Stamped from the Beginning. Uplift suasion was based on the idea that white people could be persuaded away from their racist ideas if they saw Black people improving their behavior, uplifting themselves from their low station in American society. So basically, if Black people behaved admirably, they would be undermining justifications for slavery and proving that notions of their inferiority were wrong. This is where Black excellence come from. This is where all that pull your pants up, cut your hair, don't have dreads. This is where all that comes from, and it's based on a racist belief. Because what you're trying to do, and this is like the whole issue with the bonnets and all of that stuff, regardless of how you feel, at the end of the day, it's uplift suasion, because you're saying that I have to look and be X, Y, and Z in order for you to not believe what you say I am. And so for you to even feel like you have to do that, you got to believe that's who you are too. So the reason why Claudette was not chosen as the face of this movement, because she was actually pregnant. She was 15 at the time, and she was pregnant, and they did not want to show or have a pregnant girl to be the leader, because they felt like it would be a distraction. Now, not saying it wouldn't have been, it would have been, but at the same time, is this about integrating the bus? Or is it about proving that you deserve to be, you know what I'm saying? Like, so that's the thing with uplift suasion. A lot of us grew up on it. I used to believe in it. I used to do it. But it's something that I don't waste my time with anymore, because you cannot persuade somebody to not be racist. And in order to do that, you would have to deal with the things that they believe you and change that about yourself, which means that you believe it too. So yeah. But that's enough. That I've already talked at length about that in previous discussions that are on my personal channel. So moving on. It was interesting that, to me, there was a theme of white and conservative paternalism throughout this chapter, and it's also a theme within that too. There's also this theme of Black people breaking away or leaving the church to reinvent the religion so that it addresses them. And I thought that was interesting. Like, you see this constant reinvention, this constant trying to practice this fully. I wasn't able to, and I don't know what that means. I'm thinking some things, but I don't know what it means, and I would rather wait till we have more people to talk about it. But I thought that was interesting. And I think that we still see that. We do still see that, because that's where this book was born. This book is basically Jamar's equivalent to Dr. King breaking away from the Baptist convention. Also me leaving my church, and now I'm doing this and I'm talking about these things. There's just this forever we have been trying to reinvent this. And I'm wondering if that means something, and if it does, what. So I do have a question. I think Yolo is the only person here with me now. So if you are still watching, please feel free to address this. But I wonder, yes, baby. You scared him. He said his teeth. Why weren't Christian activists protected? How did this happen? Did anybody ask those questions? Like, Martin Luther King should have been protected by all people, and he wasn't. But he was Christian. He was a pastor. How was he not protected? Yes, I can see your comments. And I just can't see your name. For Facebook, with the software that I use, you have to give it permission to show your name. And it's I think you moved from YouTube to Facebook. It's on it's linked to the post. So if you go back to where the live post, like the text of the post, it'll have a way for you to do it. But I can't see your comments. I don't know. That was just interesting for me. And I've been thinking a lot about the whole true Christian thing, because we talked about that a bunch in the last discussion. And I was watching some old sermons today on YouTube, and I came across a pastor who says that this Christianity that was being practiced, all of it was really paganism, and they were saying it was Christianity. So I'm going to look back into that, but I think that would answer some of our questions, or maybe deal with our confusion around how these things were happening and who the true Christians are. And ironically, he was using the book of Enoch, which I keep talking about. I keep telling y'all that it's you gotta read that book. I want to do a Bible study of it so bad. But yeah, he was talking about the book of Enoch, and it was how he came to that conclusion. But anyway, I thought that was interesting. Also, I want YOLO, since you're here with me, I want you and everyone else watching, if you're watching on a replay, to look at Robert's comment on the last video, and he talked about white Jesus. So on page 147, it talks about white Jesus and how even in the 16th Street Church where they bombed it, there was a picture of white Jesus. And I want you to really be real with yourself and ask yourself, who do you see when you think of Jesus? Because I think I'm sorry, his name is not Robert. Rodney on YouTube was saying in his comment was that we have not reconciled our race with the faith, and that he could not, as hard as he tried, he's an adult and cannot get white Jesus out of his head. And I think that's interesting. I do. I really think it's interesting because for me, I don't have any imagery of Jesus going on when I'm talking about Jesus. The imagery that I have going in my mind is, I don't know. I'm not seeing Jesus though, so I can't really say that that's my experience. But when I do think of Jesus and have imagery, it is the white Jesus, just because the only black Jesus I saw was just a black version of white Jesus. He had the same hair. I've never seen Jesus with curly hair. So I haven't ever seen that depiction. And there's actually a black artist. He depicted characters from the Bible as black people. But again, Tony would say none of that really matters. But I just thought that was worth noting because he talked about white Jesus in that chapter. So YOLO's saying that they couldn't protect Dr. King because he was going too far and black folks was stealing him out. And I guess when I say that, I mean along the way, he didn't, as a whole, and not just King, but other activists, y'all converted these people, but then you don't protect them. It is so hypocritical, the theology and the action, or whatever the right words are for. So I was just why would they not protect Christian activists, even those who were abolitionists? Y'all, why y'all didn't build up an army? Why y'all didn't have a counter to the Klan? they were always trying to fight a violent people who had no reason, who had, they were not able to reason like normal people. They were violent people. They were people without a conscience, and you're fighting them with tactics that could only work if they had one. Like, it just, you know. But even, yeah, like the estate sanction, I'm not saying that there's something people could have done to not get King killed. I'm saying as a whole, not just him, just those at the time, Black people, period. Black people always had to reinvent their version of church. Why couldn't they get that love inside the church? Why couldn't they get that protection inside the church, that lobbying, advocacy inside the church, that support? So that's where I was coming from with it. So again, from chapter 8, also, if you don't know, the story in the beginning involves Mississippi's last governor, Phil Bryant's family. So when you're talking about the Bryant family and Carolyn Bryant, she is related to Mississippi's former governor. And that just shows you how disrespectful Mississippi politics, like how they are to Blacks, that you would, Emmett Till, his murder just rocked the nation. And now a descendant of the woman who lied about it is the governor. Like, this just is terrible. But fun fact to end this chapter, he talked about James Meredith in the chapter. I've actually met James Meredith before. His wife was one of my professors in undergrad at Jackson State when I was attending college there. So this just kind of goes to show you that these things were not that long ago, that James Meredith is still living. He's still alive, and Dr. King maybe would have been too, had he not been assassinated. He may have been alive too. And so, coming to a close, I can't believe I kept this under an hour. Maybe, I don't know, but I don't like being by myself, so I gotta have somebody with me or some people with me to close it out next week. But in chapter 9, I didn't put in any of my notes here on the screen, but yeah, that's it. The main takeaway from chapter 9, let me go back to it in my book. It starts on page 152. Oh, so this is about how racism has adapted, how it has continued to adapt. And I think this is chapter 9 gets closer to where we are now. And I know where I felt, because you can, like, now you're in a church where people who they don't believe that these things are even real. They don't believe that these things are real. So they're not going to accept that they have white privilege, which means they're going to continue to say things that are racist and compromising with racists, such as the colorblind discourse. And that's something that I can't stand. Like, I don't see color. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. So that chapter kind of talked about that, and how, like, Trump, how the stage was set for Trump in terms of conservatism and the left. Also, it talked about the holiday. Martin Luther King Day is a holiday. Yeah, signed a bill in 169, and that's so ironic because Joe Biden just signed a bill making Juneteenth a national holiday. So you're seeing this symbolism again that does nothing for us. It doesn't do a thing to change anything. This is a social thing. It's about acknowledgement. So it's still about white people saying, hey, okay, we believe you. So passing a Juneteenth national holiday bill that's going to benefit everybody. Again, nothing specifically for Black folks. This benefits everyone. It's totally symbolic. At the same time, banning critical race theory from being taught. So you approve a national holiday, but then you can't even teach about it because it would, like, don't make sense. But that's it, y'all. I'm done for the night. I want it to be very brief because I don't know. Like I said, I love the book. I love the content, but it's just hard. I want to be able to talk about these with more people. And, you know, I don't know, the people got to read the book and then they got to agree to come on. So it's just a lot of things to go into this. So please do have a conversation in the comment section for those of you who are watching the replay. I go back and I look and I leave comments. Don't forget to join the Facebook group. Next week will be our last discussion of the book. That's it. We done with this. After that, I'm going to try to interview the author. We'll see how that goes. But don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you are not already. And I will see y'all in the next discussion. I'll see y'all next week. And if you have anything that you want to talk about, anything that I should have mentioned that I didn't, make sure you post it in the Facebook group as well. See y'all next time.